I want to invite up Victoria, Hornbaker, and Keith Okasaki. They're going to do a joint presentation to just remind us about all of the great work that they do, how that work interacts with us. And we are definitely appreciative that they made the big trip down here.
Sorry, I was writing myself a note in my phone to get a hold of Beth and ask her the question about Ventura. Keith and I are gonna do a joint on this presentation. I'm gonna kind of cover just some general information about the program, and then Keith's gonna jump in and give you guys some more information. Most of you or many of you may know Keith from different meetings that he's been to, but he's recently been appointed as our statewide regulatory lead for our Citrus Pest and Disease Prevention Division at CDFA. So congratulations to Keith. He's got a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure he'll continue to do good work for all of us when it comes to the regulatory enforcement to prevent the artificial spread of ACP and HLB. So, all right. There we go. I don't have my glasses on, but they're on, but not on my eyes. So what do we do at our program? In 2019, we became a standalone division, started hiring folks to really support the citrus industry. And then lo and behold, something really weird happened, a pandemic, and kind of slowed down our process. But we're fully staffed as we can be right now with, normal folks leaving and coming and going. But what we do is in addition to ACP and HLB, we do some other things, and Keith will touch on that later as well. But we do trapping and visual survey for Asian citrus psyllid and longbing. What does that mean? Throughout the state in different areas that are not considered generally infested. So Ventura is considered generally infested. So we don't have a lot of traps out in Ventura. We know we have psyllids here. What we do in Ventura is we collect psyllids and we test them for CLAS. So not unlike what Neil and they did in that study, we do it. However, we're following the USDA work instructions. So we're not seeing any positives coming out of Ventura, either in psyllids or plant material that we're collecting. So we're doing that visual survey for psyllids. We're looking for trees that are looking symptomatic. We do two different types of trapping. We do detection and delimitation. So delimitation and detection are mostly in the Central Valley in Northern California. We detect. If we find something, then we delimit to see what's the extent of that infestation. For HLB, we're doing visual survey, collecting psyllids, collecting plant tissue. If we find something, we will do a visual delimitation survey. We do residential treatments, and I'm going to clarify that it's residential. We, CDFA, are not treating on grower property unless there's some reason to try to help compel a grower to treat in a mandatory response to HLB. Generally, we leave that to the growers. We communicate with the growers. We have our grower liaisons. They work with you, and we let you know, hey, this has occurred. We need you to do X, Y, and Z. And for the most part, when it comes to growers where we've ever had anything, we've never had an issue getting a grower to do what they need to do. We do biocontrol. So you heard Dr. McRoberts talk about biocontrol. We are raising Tamrixia radiata. It is a parasitoid. Not only do they host feed, so the Tamrixia will feed on ACP, they also parasitize ACP. However, ant control. If we're not controlling ants, we're not going to get good numbers from the biocontrol. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Is that a little better? And then quarantine, and Keith will touch on that. And of course, hopefully you guys are all having some touch point with our outreach in some way, fashion, or form, so that we can keep information flowing to you either through our Citrus Insider website or through eBlasts or communications with the grower liaisons. We just want to make sure that you guys have information flowing to you on a regular basis. So detection trapping, where we're doing detection trapping, it's 5 to 16 traps per square mile. Really depends on the amount of citrus that is grown in an area. So if you're in a county, let's say Monterey has a small amount of citrus. So we're doing more traps. I think it's 9 traps per square mile in Monterey. But if you're in, I don't know, Sacramento, We're not growing a lot of citrus in Sacramento commercially, so we're doing 5 traps per square mile. So our trapping varies on the amount of citrus that's grown in a county. And those traps are in residential areas. We also do some commercial grove trapping in the Central Valley. Here in Southern California, again, we're focusing on survey. We're not focusing on trapping. You may see some traps out, and those traps are out to allow us to do the activities that we need to do when it comes to treating buffers, or other things, in response to the good work you all are doing to treat your commercial groves. If we find an ACP in an area that's not generally infested, we do the delimitation trapping. That's 50 traps per square mile in a 4 square mile radius centered on the detection. Those traps are left out for a year. We service them weekly for the first month. If we collect anything in those traps, they get analyzed for CLAS. Once we go to monthly trapping, unfortunately, the psyllids don't hold up that long. And those are just identification at that point. So I talked about visual survey. We do something with what we call multi-pest risk survey. So our risk survey is really focused on HLB. Where is the risk of finding HLB? And that modeling was developed by USDA ARS. Many of you may have heard of Dr. Tim Gottwald. He's recently retired from USDA. That work has been turned over to Dr. Wiki Lowe at ARS. But we work with the ARS researchers. They give us these risk models every year. We're going out then and saying, where do we think HLB might be found? And that's where we're focusing our efforts to do visual survey. Our team is trained. In addition to HLB and ACP, they're also looking for, there's a list, sweet orange scab, citrus yellow vein clearing virus, citrus canker, citrus black spot, citrus variegated chlorosis, citrus leprosis, and citrus yellow mosaic virus. Most of those are not known to occur in California. However, sweet orange scab is, and most recently, citrus yellow vein clearing virus has been detected in California. We also do a commodity survey every year, and that's when you guys might see us out on your commercial groves. We try to get to 20% of commercial citrus every 5 years. We're getting 20% every year to get 100% in a 5-year time frame. Again, looking for those same things that we talked about, in addition to looking for citrus brown aphid and citrus longhorn borer. And then we also do visual delimitation. So if we find ACP, we usually do a very small visual delimitation where we're out looking. Our trappers are also trained to look for symptoms, and if they see a tree that looks symptomatic, they'll collect plant samples then. But if we have an HLB detection, we do a mandatory 250 meter survey of all citrus hosts in the area. So again, we do treatments. Everything that we do is voluntary unless we find an HLB positive tree. That's when the treatments become mandatory. Now we hope that folks will participate, because I think, as we all say, keeping those psyllid populations as low as possible is going to help us prevent that eventual spread of HLB into commercial groves. I think, when you guys talk about how do we know if we're making a difference, I think comparing, and I don't know, this may not be 100% good comparison. I'm looking at Neil. Comparing what's happened in other parts of the world where ACP and HLB have come in to what's happened in California. We had our first ACP trapped in California in 2008, our first HLB positive tree in 2012. Here we are, the first month in 2023. And our psyllid populations, I think you saw on that slide that Neil showed first, 522 as of December, 522 psyllid samples that were positive for CLAS out of almost 550,000 samples that were processed. In other parts of the US where they found HLB, we're seeing much higher levels of CLAS positive psyllids than we are in California. Climate, the work you guys are doing, biocontrol program that they developed in California, which is different than anywhere else where they're doing Tamarixia releases. So those factors can all play into why we're seeing more success in California and slowing the spread of HLB. So for ACP, if we find it in uninfested areas, we're doing a 50 meter treatment if we find one psyllid. If we find multiple psyllids, it's 400 meters around that site. For a CLAS positive psyllid, it's 250 meters. And then for HLB positive treatment, it's 250 meters around that positive site. Again, biocontrol, we are mass producing Tamarixia radiata at our facilities at Mount Rubidoux and at Cal State University, Pomona. We are releasing those areas. We're really focusing our releases right now around where HLB has been detected. Dr. Morgan is the scientist that leads the CDFA portion of this project, and it is a collaborative project with us, Citrus Research Board, and USDA and the university. They look at the area that we're doing the treatment in, and they do releases in the buffer. So the hope is that if we don't tidy everything up with those 250 meter treatments, the biocontrol agents are going to come in and parasitize or kill the ACP that might still be out there. To date, over 25 million wasps have been released in 14 counties in California. We've also worked with Arizona and Mexico to provide them with Tamarixia to release, also to protect our borders. So ACP and HLB quarantine, I'll be very brief here because Keith's going to get into it. We have a federal domestic order and a state interior quarantine. We're kind of lucky in that we are able to establish these 5-mile HLB quarantines and not have to quarantine the whole state in response to an HLB detection. It creates a little bit more work, but it also helps us keep parts of our state, and right now most of our commercial growing areas, out of an HLB quarantine. So who do we regulate? We regulate nurseries, bulk citrus, so commercial growers, haulers, green waste, yard maintenance, swap meets, anywhere where we can see that people could potentially spread ACP or HLB through the movement of plant material. And outreach, again, like I said, I hope you guys have all either gotten on the Citrus Insider or signed up for bulletins or getting information from the grower liaisons, but we have 3 focus points: industry, homeowners, and elected officials. We want to make sure that our industry is knowledgeable about what's going on in the program, what resources are out there. We want to make sure that homeowners understand why it's important to participate in the program. And working with the elected officials reinforces that work that we're doing with the homeowners, because a lot of times someone says, hey, there's a guy on my property, I'm going to call my local county office or my city manager and say, what's going on with this guy? We want them to understand why we're out there. And specifically to HLB, I wanted to talk about our specific responses. We have a residential response and we have a commercial grove response. These are lined out in our action plan that is on our CDFA website. Residential response to an HLB positive tree, this is only for a tree, not a CLAS positive psyllid, mandatory 250 meter delimitation and treatment. Mandatory removal of the infected tree. We don't take trees that are not infected. It has to be PCR positive. Plant debris is safeguarded on site and disposed of by deep burial at a landfill. If a homeowner refuses, we do have abatement authority and we will issue a warrant and abate the property to take the tree. We don't, in California, we do not leave HLB positive trees in the ground because they're a source of inoculum. Psyllids are going to feed on that positive tree and they're going to spread the bacteria to other trees in the area. Oh, I have pictures. There's some photos of some of the work that our team does. And then for commercial grove, the response is a little different. Again, we're going to rely on the commercial growers to initiate activities on the grove. We're going to communicate and then work with the growers. First of all, a grove to us is a contiguous citrus of 1 acre or more, approximately 100 trees. We have to kind of make that distinction because, like, for instance, my mom has 28 citrus trees in her backyard. We consider her a 25 plus property, but she's technically not a commercial grower. She's not selling the citrus. It's not 1 acre. It's not 100 trees. We are going to expect her to pay for her own treatment or take some trees out if we're going to treat if we have an HLB positive tree on her property. The intent, like I said, the intent has to be that they're harvesting the fruit for sale. We're going to ask growers to treat and remove that infected tree, and there's some timelines, and it's all laid out in our action plan. And also, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Sandra and Cressida, in that document that we put together for growers, right? I think it's 72 hours or something. We want the grower to treat the grove with approved pesticides. Those are all on the UC IPM website. And we, again, will do a mandatory 250-meter delimitation survey and treatment. We're going to handle all the residential properties. If the grove is, 250 meters of the treatment is the grove, we're going to expect the grower to get appropriate treatments on. And we're going to survey the perimeter of all groves in that delimitation area annually. And with that, so I'm going to turn it over to Keith to give you guys some more detail.
Before you turn it over, we have a couple of questions.
No.
Just a couple.
Okay.
Tamarixia, are they becoming endemic?
Well, that's a good question. I know that Dr. Morgan and his team, when they're going out to check their survey sites, they have found Tamarixia in areas where we haven't released. So we know they're dispersing. There are parts of the state where they can overwinter, and there are parts of the state where they likely will not overwinter. So that's why we continue to do the releases.
Are non-CDFA insectaries permitted to raise and release Tamarixia?
Yeah, so they would just need to, I believe there's a permit that they have to apply for. Keith, is that correct? Yeah, but yes, at one point we did have a non-CDFA insectary working with Tamarixia. I don't think they are anymore, but yeah.
Can Tamarixia overwinter in Ventura?
That is a good question. And I think the answer is they're not sure that they do. I think it gets too cold for them to overwinter. Yeah. Along the coast, probably too cold. Further inland, maybe yes.
Why, stepping away from the Tamarixia question,
Okay.
why do state mandates start only when HLB is detected? Why can't the state mandate at the detection of ACP to participate in area-wide treatment?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. And back in 2014, our primary state entomologist made a determination that it was not feasible for us to eradicate ACP. And at that point, we lost our ability to mandate because it's not feasible to eradicate. Why would we compel someone to do that activity? And the reason why we don't enforce on a CLAS positive psyllid is because we will not establish a quarantine on a CLAS positive psyllid because the USDA doesn't see that as a regulatory, I don't know, Keith, what's the right way to put it? A regulatory trigger because psyllids move.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being said, we did work with our legal office and with Dr. McRoberts and his team to make a determination that if we have a CLAS positive nymph on a tree, we will work to remove that tree, because there's only two ways that CLAS can be spread to a nymph, either from the mother during, from a transovarial transmission, which I think literature says maybe 3%, or through feeding on an infected tree. So either that positive nymph is giving the tree CLAS while it feeds, or it's acquiring it from the tree while it feeds. So the assumption is, and the science tells us, and our legal team has weighed in, that they would support removal of a tree where we found a CLAS positive nymph.
Great. There'll be more time to ask questions from Victoria, but right now I'll, here, you can join me up here. Yeah. I'll invite Keith up to finish the second half of the presentation.
It's a smart one.
That's a lie. That's a lie. All right. So I guess that's the big. All right. So based on those statewide risk-based survey that Victoria talked about that we're doing throughout the state, we're now up to, as of last week, just over 4,300 positive trees. This is not okay. Just a little low. I think when we met with the task force a couple of weeks ago, the numbers at the end of December was just under 4,200. So in the last month or so, we've picked up an extra 100 positive trees. We're finding them in the same 5 counties: LA, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego. orange continues to be a hotspot. There's the total number of positive psyllids that we have detected at 561 out of the 500,000, almost 600,000 psyllids that we've collected and tested. So around those detections, or this kind of just shows where those detections are. The green ones are the plant, or where we've detected it in a plant and have established a quarantine area around those detections of 5 miles. The green area is a mandatory treatment like Victoria talked about. That's where we go in 250 meters from those detections. There's a mandatory treatment. The purple sections is where we found a positive psyllid, and that does not trigger a quarantine and is we treat around the 250 meters around there, but is not a mandatory treatment area. Okay, so the requirements, again, this is our quarantine area, lastly expanded in the southern area of Orange County at the beginning of this month. Again, that's just for positive tree detections. So I know there's questions about, a lot of what ifs, what's going to be required of me, and that's all dependent on your location in relation to the packing house that you're going to. And so I'm going to try to cover some of the basics, and then happy to take more detailed what if questions as we move along. But so again, it all depends on where your grove is, where your packer is. That'll tell you everything you need to know. If all are within the same contiguous quarantine area, one mitigation is required. That mitigation could be a pre-harvest treatment. It could be a field cleaning. It could be some kind of a wet wash. We have ethyl formate is being worked on, hopefully by end of this year, next year, hopefully. So we are trying to add tools to the toolbox to make it easier to be able to move fruit. If you are moving out of that quarantine area, then obviously that's a higher risk. You're coming from an area where HLB has been detected, moving to an area where it has not. So 2 of those mitigations are required, or some kind of a wet wash. Again, that wet wash can be like at a packing house, running fruit through the first part of a packing line, like it's done quite a bit in other areas. Just like you're doing now, safeguarding in transit and submitting that appropriate notification to the local county ag commissioner's office. So one of those mitigations, again, is the spray and harvest. These mitigations are a performance standard, and that standard is to ship fruit free from psyllids or to mitigate the pest risk of spreading HLB. The spray and harvest products, they were recommended to CDFA, I think by Beth back in 2013. After Beth left, Monique took over for her. She maintained this list, made recommendations to add products, remove products. But this is a subset of the list of products that's available on the UC IPM website for area-wide treatment. So these are the specific products that the UC has recommended to CDFA that are the most effective at killing psyllids, have the longest residual effect after treatment, because you have 14 days after harvest or after treatment to harvest fruit and move it. So these have been recommended to us as the most effective. Again, compared to the area-wide treatment that lists basically everything that can be applied to citrus for psyllids, that does include organic products. The UC, I'm sure Beth did it. I know Monique was working on it while she was here. They were trying to determine if organics could be used. But even looking at, they even looked at spraying two organic treatments within a few days of each other and determined that the residuals weren't good enough to be able to ship fruit free from ACP. So again, just kind of a comparison of those two, and well, backing up again, the spray and harvest is not required. It's not a mandatory mitigation. There are other mitigations that can be used, but just in comparing the two, again, the spray and harvest products are a subset of those listed on the UC IPM page. You do have 14 days after treatment to be able to harvest. These products were recommended to us by the UC because they've been shown to be the most effective. So going back to I mentioned that it's a performance standard to ship fruit free from psyllids or to mitigate the pest risk. So that spray and harvest is not required. It's not required to use a field cleaning machine. Really, we are open to any tools or any ideas that you as growers or packers or anybody can come up with that will help mitigate the pest risk. This was one of them, a great cleaning device. It's not the traditional field cleaning machine, but through working with the county ag commissioners, I know Ventura is out there quite a bit working with growers, working with packers. They're doing a great job. Working with growers and the counties, we've been able to help develop different ways of mitigating that pest risk. So we are absolutely open to anything that you guys come up with. I know in San Luis Obispo, a packing house took an older wash line, stationed it in Napomo, and allowed growers in the area to bring their fruit there to wash their fruit and bring it to whatever packer they're going to. I'm sure for a fee, but they set up a station where growers in the area could use that to be able to move fruit, because in San Luis Obispo, I mean, there's no packing houses. So rather than having to spray their fruit all the time, they put in a wash line for them. So these are just trying to depict some kind of hypothetical situations, just to try to illustrate what we were just talking about. So those green spots are, we'll call them packing houses, and the kind of darkish square, so if we were to find HLB, we would establish a quarantine. So say like if you were a grower within that quarantine area and you wanted to go to one of those packing houses inside that square, you would need one mitigation. If you wanted to go to a packing house outside, that's when the two mitigations or the wet wash would come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I don't know if Keith was going to go there, but what you're seeing there with the shading of colors on the counties, those are our citrus ACP zones. And so right now, if you grow, let's say in the orange zone and you pack in the green zone, you're already required to do a mitigation and safeguard the load. So if you're in that square, you would be doing the same thing that you're already doing now to ship outside. If you're growing and packing in that square, it'd be just like you're doing right now if you're growing in the orange zone and shipping to the green zone to pack. No difference. Sorry, Keith.
No, thank you. Similarly though, if your grove is outside of those, if your grove is outside of the quarantine, still in Ventura County, you could move freely to those packers within the quarantine or to those packers in Ventura outside of the quarantine. We're all just, again, coming down to where your grove is, where those packing houses are, and then just the determined level of risk will help determine the mitigations to be used. And I don't think this is actually all that helpful, but similarly, if your grove, and this could happen, if your grove is in the quarantine there with no packing capacity, then you would be required to do a dual mitigation or a wet wash to move fruit out. So it all just, again, it comes down to location. But we are very happy and willing to work with you to be able to try to move fruit in a way that mitigates the pest risk.
Let me help bring a microphone so everyone, our 70 online participants, can also hear the question.
If we're talking theoretically and running scenarios and you're open, what would it entail if we did a countywide quarantine so that we could stick to the one mitigation step?
So our authority extends only to 5 miles from an HLB detection. So we would not be able to establish a countywide quarantine based on a single detection. Previously for ACP, prior to 2018, we had little 5-mile circles throughout the state where ACP had been detected. We went to the regional quarantine structure that you see here back in 2018. But really, to establish a county-wide quarantine, we would need detections throughout the county that overlapped.
Can that be changed?
It's established in our regulation, and we also follow the federal quarantine. When you
A law change, right?
it would, I'm sure it could, it would be difficult because not only are you impacting, you may be making it easier on growers, but you would be adversely impacting the nursery industry or other entities as well. So there'd be, it's right, unintended consequences. So it's not impossible. You would need a lot of buy-in from different industry groups. It's very possible. Fortunately, you guys don't have HLB yet, so hopefully that's not something that needs to be addressed, but or needs to be worried about at this time. But it's not impossible. But we would need the support of a lot of different industry groups and the county as well, and the USDA. Nurseries are nurseries in an HLB quarantine. They're not allowed to sell trees that aren't maintained in a structure. So in our quarantine areas in
I know the greenhouse thing.
so as far as in these quarantine areas, I think there are only 7 or 8 nurseries that sell citrus trees. Because those are the only nurseries that have decided that they're able to maintain an approved structure. And that's a quarantine regulation that stems down from the federal level, that trees that aren't maintained within a structure aren't eligible to be sold. So when we do establish a quarantine, we are required to go and place a hold on those trees. Nurseries are given an option to build a structure to maintain and protect them. And if not, the nursery will opt to voluntarily destroy the trees. So,
have the regulators considered the economic impact on the growers by implementing these mitigation efforts? I have a follow-up to that. I'm a conventional grower, but I'm very interested in the organic aspects of using hoverflies. Not so much tamarexia, but hoverflies and other natural predators. And if we're spraying going, we're going to add, we pick our orchard 3 times a year. If we spray a go, that means we're going to multiply our sprays by a factor of at least 2, maybe more. I don't think that's going to fly economically, nor do I think it's going to fly with the county of Ventura, the attitude we have in the county towards spray. My wife just came back from a meeting in Ojai about sprays, and they're pretty hot. And I think we should just get the Ojai people stand at our yard and say, we're not spraying, but they, I think economically, we've talked to our labor contractor. He says it's going to be a $20 add-on cost to do these grates as one of the mitigations. Well, we're already down in our bin price to a level that, we do most of the work ourselves on our small ranch, but, we're barely breaking even on it. And I don't think it's feasible to continue in the industry if we add this mandatory regulatory, when we should have had the mandatory regulatory prior to that to force the issue of spraying during the area wides.
So, and when these regulations were established, the HLB one in 2012 and the ACP one in 2008, I know that the economic impacts were considered. That being said, things change and prices fluctuate. The mitigation, I want to go back to that. It's not a requirement to spray. It's not a requirement to grate clean. It's there are other options, there are other availabilities to be able to move fruit, hopefully more economically. I don't know what ethyl formate is going to cost, but you know, it's just another toolbox. I want to go back to, we are open to other ways of mitigating that pest risk. And
That's one of the questions waiting in the chat Q&A is what the status of ethylformate formate is and when we might expect to be able to use that mitigation.
yeah, please.
Yeah, so we've been working with CCQC and Spencer Walls from USDA. The package has been submitted to Department of Pesticide Regulation and US EPA, but US EPA has stalled the package. There was some issues with it. I think that they have resolved those issues. I believe in talking to Jim Cranny from CCQC, they were looking at either the end of this year, hopefully, or beginning of next year. Ethyl formate, of course, is a fumigant. The hope is that you could carp the bins once they're on the flatbed or in the grove and run the fumigation and then shoot the bins onto the packing house. But I just want to make it clear that when Keith's talking about the mitigations, this is a performance. It's not prescriptive. We're not saying grower, you must. We're saying the only you must is you must move your fruit free from ACP. How you do that, you can be creative. If you've got an idea that you think is going to work, let us know. We'll analyze it and we'll, you know, if it works, if we think between our scientists, we say, yeah, that looks like it's going to work. We'll green light it for you. You don't have to treat, you don't have to grate clean, you don't have to wet wash. Those are options that have already been pre-cleared by our scientists, but there's other potential options, any number of options that could potentially be out there. We just need someone to come up with them and you know, submit them to us for analysis.
So like with the grate cleaning, that originated with growers that were moving fruit to Ventura from Monterey. We went a lot of back and forth with them on design, efficacy. The county was great. They were out there at packing houses all the time, making sure that this would work. You know, we established protocols on how to do it. But yeah, so we're very happy and willing to work with growers and add tools to the toolbox because we know with pesticide availability or just not wanting to spray in general, you know, the toolbox is shrinking. So we are trying to expand it in any way we can. There's a couple more, just more updates.
Could we wait and because I have more questions, we'll let Keith finish his presentation and then we'll go to Q&A.
So just wanted to provide a couple other updates on some of our activities. So sweet orange scab, the first time we had sweet orange scab, which is a fungal pathogen. It was first detected in 2013, and we established regulated areas using our federal authority, regulated 5-mile circle regulated authorities around SOS detections. We had subsequent detections in 2016, 2020, 2021, and up until I think it was last year, USDA recognized those regulated areas as, you know, as basically official. They came to us last year and said that if we would need to establish a state interior quarantine like we have for HLB and ACP to prevent California as a whole from being quarantined for SOS, which would have not very good impacts. So we've been working for the last year, worked with a working group, have had a lot of discussions with the Citrus Committee and USDA. So we are in the process of establishing an interior quarantine through rulemaking. We would transition those 5-mile radius regulated areas to quarantines. We don't have SOS that we know of in Ventura, so we wouldn't establish one here. It would just take the existing areas. You know, farthest west and north is in Pomona area. We would take those areas and transition them to regulated areas or to quarantine areas in regulation. The last week, Victoria mentioned that citrus yellow vein clearing virus, CYV-CV. We had our first detection last year in the Central Valley that triggered a delimitation area This was in Tulare County. We did a 1 mile delimitation, and after subsequent detections, both finding symptomatic, asymptomatic trees, and you can please step in here, but you're saying that, or I think the literature points that it doesn't affect yield. It doesn't necessarily affect the tree's health, but it was the first detection in the Western Hemisphere.
Right, so the detection was part of, I remember I talked about our multi-pest survey. So one of our surveyors was out doing normal multi-pest survey and he saw this tree right here. I took that picture because I went out and looked at it. You could see the yellow veins very clearly. And that triggered a 1 mile, a 1 mile delimitation where we collected samples from every host plant. We found 578 trees in the city of Tulare. As Keith said, both symptomatic and asymptomatic positives. Working with USDA, we did a 7 mile radius survey, didn't find anything around that core. 6 mile radius survey around the core, and we found an additional tree in kind of a rural area in Visalia. And on subsequent delimitation around that tree, we found a second tree in a neighboring property. Right now, we're doing a 4 mile radius survey around that new core in Visalia. Citrus yellow vein clearing virus, again, first detection in the Western Hemisphere. How did it get here? We're not sure. We are working with USDA with their cross-functional working group. We do not have any regulatory path forward at this time. That is part of what we're going to work on with the cross-functional working group once we're done with the delimitation. It in China has been shown to cause about a 20% yield reduction in lemons. It is supposed to make fruit smaller. But when our team is out doing the surveys in Tulare, the fruit all looked great. The trees looked healthy, except for the veins. And in talking to homeowners, they said they saw nothing different with their trees. They were still producing. So it may not act the same way in California. We don't know, as it acts in China or other parts of the world. But again, we'll work with USDA with our cross-functional working group to develop a regulatory path forward for CYVCV. I think it can be an export issue, but it's for very limited export countries right now. I think there's maybe Taiwan and Korea, maybe it was very limited.
I think that's the last one that we have.
Yeah, so if you don't have access to the resources, Keith has included some resources for you here. I recommend that you also look at the Citrus Insider if you're not already signed up to get alerts from Citrus Insider. They've got good information there.
And then I know we've talked about this before, but we have this listserv that it's on our website. Please sign up for it. As new products for spray and move or new mitigations become available, we will send out notifications through this. Same thing as quarantine updates. Any new quarantines that get established, we will send out notifications through this. So that way you guys can stay informed.
So I have a couple of online questions before we go to the audience questions. Is delegate effective against ACP?
Delegate is on our list, I believe. Maybe I was looking at, that might be on a nursery list. Okay.
It used to be and it was taken off the list.
Got it. Yeah, that's right.
So the audience comment was that it used to be on the UC IPM list, but it was removed.
It used to be on.
It
this-
used to be on the spray and move products list, but it is no longer on the spray and move products list, but it is on the UC IPM list for other types of mitigations.
Right. So like I mentioned earlier, the UC first Beth, now Monique, and now I know they're looking to backfill for Monique since she left. But I recall the last couple things that Monique did was I think she added Savanto and she added Fujimite, and I think she had recommended removing delegate from this list.
You did a good job of explaining the situation where the regulatory rule is that you don't have any ACP when you move your fruit. But just for clarity, could you repeat the mitigation strategies that you have been able to approve, and which ones of them are likely used for two mitigation strategies together?
So the standing mitigations that we have are the spray and harvest, field cleaning by machine, and a wet wash. We hope to add ethyl formate to that. We had a direct spray with evergreen that became not very feasible to apply. And then great cleaning is another one. The great cleaning is not a standalone mitigation. That is something that we have an approval process. Growers or packers will request of their local county to be able to use it. We'll review it. We'll have to get approval from the origin and destination county ag commissioners. But as far as the dual mitigation, a lot of times, most are doing a pre-harvest and a field cleaning, or doing a pre-harvest and taking it to a packing house that's running it through a wash line to be able to move fruit. I know there's a lot of fruit that I do think comes to Ventura from the Riverside quarantine area that's gone through a packing house line there for initial washing and cleaning.
And where can people find information on the mitigation strategies that have been approved?
So on our website, we have a grower, the bottom one, information for growers and grove managers. There's tables in there that list where, again, coming down to location, where you are, where you want to ship your fruit, and what mitigations are or can be done.
One of the online participants was commenting that they're already spraying 3 to 4 times a year, twice for area-wide treatment and 1 to 2 times for IPM sprays. If their orchard is put into a quarantine zone, then they'd likely have to stop the area-wide treatment participation and focus only on spray and move.
So again, spray and move is not a requirement. It is an option, but you can, I think it can be done or has been done where an area-wide treatment, if you use one of the products on the spray and harvest list, can basically count as your area-wide and your spray and harvest for that 14-day window.
Back to this idea of a county-wide quarantine. If you are unable to determine a county-wide quarantine, is there another governing body that could declare it, such as the ag commissioner or somebody else?
Ed?
So quarantine authority really resides with USDA, and then they delegate authority down to us, and then we delegate authority for activities down to the county ag commissioner. So we would have to work if let's say you guys came up and said, we've decided in Ventura, we want to go countywide. Keeping in mind that any nursery growing or selling citrus, if they're not under screen, they would have to either go under screen or forfeit all of their nursery stock in the county, right? So that's an unintended consequence. Also, farmers markets may be impacted, different things. Anyways, that aside, we would have to go to USDA and have those conversations with USDA. They would have to concur. They would have to change their federal order. We would then have to go through and change our California Code of Regulations to say that we can establish a county-wide quarantine. So there would be, it's not that it can't be done. There's unintended consequences for others. And then also it would be a very long and tedious process and could potentially create issues for trade.
Mm-hmm. So an audience member said, what about an emergency proclamation, a way to expedite the process? So I think this is one of those questions we're probably not going to answer right now in the next few minutes, but I can assure you a lot of people are thinking about these these questions and are interested in investigating the options. So I think that's something we can report back to the grower community. And if you want to be involved in looking into that, let me know so I can make sure you're part of the conversation. Yeah, of course. Can I give you the microphone?
My name is Doug Holmesy. If you want to hate anybody specifically, that's me for all my questions, but this is for the regulators. If we have our orchard tested in any way by one of these non-government agencies, Neil's group or somebody else, and they come up with I forget the term that he's using, but not a real positive, but a positive. And we want to remove trees, et cetera, based on that. I just want to be clear, that does not involve bringing down the hammer.
No, so for a regulatory action to be taken, it would have to be either a USDA, CDFA, or county staff who came out, collected the tree, and had that sample tested at an approved lab, which would be, in this case, would be our CDFA lab in Sacramento.
And I know right now we're doing this sort of secret. We don't know where these 5 sites are. I don't know if it's right next to me or, would it not be more valuable for the industry in Ventura County specifically if we use these groups tested and then remove the anonymity and make it, the Holmesy Ranch is positive, therefore this ranch should probably do the same testing.
So
Yeah, so if we had an official HLB positive through the regulatory process, again, like he said, collected by the county, state, or federal employee and submitted to a NIPLAP certified lab that's using the USDA work instruction for CLAS, then we would establish a 250-meter treatment area. Our grower liaisons would work with growers within a mile of that detection. We wouldn't point directly to who or where the actual detection was, but everybody would be notified in that 1 mile area that there was HLB in the area. And of course, we encourage people to manage their groves and make decisions, whether that's, the HLB canines came out and they sat on a tree, so we took that tree out. Or, Neil's group told us that XYZ happened, so we took a tree out. That is your decision to make as a grower, as an owner of that property, manager of that property. You don't have to notify us. Now, if somebody is working under a CDFA permit to do work, they're required to notify us within 24 hours of a quote unquote presumptive positive. And then we would have to come out to that location and recreate that positive. We would have to sample, we would have to send it to our lab, and then it would have to come up positive for us to take action. So there are requirements in our permits for our partners that are permitted to communicate with us when they find something. It doesn't mean there's going to be action taken because we have to recreate that. And as you guys probably are aware, CLAS may not distribute evenly throughout a tree. So where they sampled the tree and where we sampled the tree could be completely different. How they're doing the sampling, the analysis, and how our lab does it following the USDA work instruction can be completely different, and we could get different results. So we encourage you to use whatever tools are available to make management decisions on your property. And you will only see us if we collect a sample and it comes up positive, or if one of our partners says, hey, check out this tree on this property. We did XYZ and it looks like it might be hot. And then we're going to come out and we're going to sample it.
All right, we have another audience question.
There's just more of a comment. I think moving forward, the task force is definitely going to continue to discuss pursuing this countywide quarantine push, look at the pros and the cons, talk to packers, talk to Citrus Mutual, talk to individual growers, because it does make a lot of sense. But again, we want to anticipate the cons. So we may be looking toward both of you as liaisons to USDA and pushing that effort forward. And then on the county level, seeing what we can establish as far as mitigation tools to add to that 5 that are already established, or just scaling up some of those tools that a lot of growers aren't using already. Because this spray comment in the Zoom is accurate. People are going to, if spraying is their tool that they're going to use, they're going to drop the area-wide sprays off their list. So I just think please anticipate that, because that's part of our charge as a task force, is to try to stay ahead of HLB.
Yeah, I was going to recommend it. And I don't know if maybe this is something Keith can work with our counterparts in other parts of the state, but we do have areas of the state where we have commercial growers and packing houses that are within an HLB quarantine. So maybe we can get some folks to share how they've navigated things when that has occurred. We've had some really difficult and challenging quarantine establishments where we really had to get creative on how folks were going to get their fruit to pack, right? So I don't know, maybe Keith, we can work on maybe at the next task force, or get some folks from Riverside or San Bernardino or San Diego to come in and talk about how they've navigated it.
Definitely. Fortunately, in other areas of the state, and here too, growers, packers have been really open with sharing information, sharing great ideas, ATE and EAT, but sharing great ideas and sharing designs and helping people get fruit to packing houses. And we're here to help facilitate that.
If we have a person who decides to see if he can figure out what your HLB is there any rules that a person who investigates in his own to be ruling against some law that I'm not aware of?
I think what you're asking is if you want to employ someone, or if you want to go through.
The
your
guy's got a
growth-
Ouija board. He thinks he knows
Yeah.
what he's doing.
No, that you're, like I said, you guys are within your rights to use whatever tools you want to use on your grove. Absolutely. If they're permitted by CDFA, then there's that requirement that if they find something, they notify us.
Yeah.
If it's,
They
well,
just appeared out of nowhere and then I think they know what they're doing.
yeah, and if you believe them and you want to make management decisions based on that, that is your right to do that.
And there's no penalties for that person, nor if it turns out he's correct.
No, I mean, if it turns out he's correct, it's probably a good idea for you to share that information with your neighbors so they can
Oh,
talk to
now
them
you know
too.
the thing when the red circle goes to bid.
Bill's got a comment in the back too.
All right, Neil.
Yeah, just say, if the method that your person's using stays in the field there, if it's a Ouija board or looking at cards or chicken bones, it doesn't matter what it is. It's fine, but where there would be an issue is if they take plant material out of the block, and particularly if they move it across the county line to test it in some way, that's a big no-no. But if they're just kind of sucking their lips and looking at the dirt and stuff, then yep, they can do that anywhere they like.
Well, we've got you captive. I would like to go retroactively and ask you, throughout your discussions today, the lifespan of an ACP, I confuse, morbidity based on weather or morbidity based on pesticide, or do all the adult ACPs weather and die during the winter, and the larvae are waiting to hatch out again? Give me a lifespan of an ACP and how things go depending on the weather and other things that influence the lifespan. So if we're organic and we just like to turn our eyes and look the other way, what are our chances of doing? We do have some of those people in this audience right now.
So if I understood the question right, you're asking me to comment on how long they live for if you don't try to kill them. Is that right? How long, you're asking me to talk about how long the ACP live if you're not actually trying to kill them. Okay. 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 The question is, do they die over winter if they're there, but you don't know they're there? It depends on how cold it gets. So here in Ventura, there probably is some cold induced mortality over winter. The other thing that happens when it's cold is that because they like to live where it's warm, they basically stop moving around when it's cold, and then things like generalist predators that are active in the winter can find them more easily, and they don't fly away because they're too cold to fly, so they get eaten. So there's higher morbidity in the winter, but it's not directly because the cold's killing them, it's because they're not very active. No, this so only the adults can drink from mature plant tissue. So when there's no flush around, the adults stay alive by finding a plant that they can extract liquid from. So, and the eggs are really small and really fragile. So you can pretty much assume if it's not good weather for breeding, most of the other life stages disappear pretty rapidly because the the nymphs can't drink, so they dehydrate, and the eggs get basically either frozen or zapped by the sunlight, or they desiccate in heat. So the adults are really the only life stage that can survive when it's either too cold or too hot for reproduction to be happening.
Is this a Keith Victoria question?
Question for Keith. Hey, Chris Homake, Pest Control Advisor. I was thinking of alternatives for, the spraying moves, and considering gases and gassing bins. Has it been looked at for ozone treatment? Because I see the USDA is looking at it for pathogens, funguses. Thanks.
That's a great question. I know that they're trying to, for a lot of this, we do rely on the UC. So, and that's how a lot of these different, like ethyl formate and evergreen and so the UC and USDA for looking at and evaluating different mitigations. So that's something that if you have something that you can propose, would like to take that, and we can always try to push it along and have it evaluated.
Hi, I'm Ed Williams. I'm your County Ag Commissioner. And I guess I'm just trying to figure out why exactly you want to establish a quarantine in Ventura County for Ventura County. There are pest control districts that exist around the state, citrus pest control districts specifically, and they do have kind of specific requirements in them that are a little different than quarantine situations, but I think we would need to really understand what the purpose and what what exactly you want to accomplish out of establishing a quarantine specific to Ventura for that, for this. So it's something we could maybe look at and explore, but it may take some work to kind of figure out how to make it work and to what you're trying to do.
I think my understanding, Ed, was if there was an HLB detection, rather than going 5 miles, go full county, then it allows more flexibility in moving to pack if you're packing within the county. If you're packing out of the county, you're still going to be triggering the 2 mitigations. But again, like I said, the worry for me is the nurseries in the county, other entities in the county that would suffer because of an artificially established quarantine. And by artificial, I mean larger than what's in regulation.
Keith, I have a question. Twice now you've said in so many words you want to help us. And I am curious about the use of hydrogels for ant control. And you stated you were open to any idea which will mitigate a pest risk. And you said that if the UC endorses it, that you'd go along with their help. So we've got UC Mark Hoddle showing that hydrogels used with thiamethoxam and or spinosad, which is organic, has shown up to 92% reduction in ACP in backyard trees in the LA area. I'm sorry. and David Haviland in Kern County and Monica Cooper up in Napa Valley with Argentine ants on grapes with vine mealybug. So I hear you saying this twice, and yet you told us at a previous meeting that that was out of your control. So
Right, it is.
I'm
That-
getting mixed messages here.
No, that falls to the Department of Pesticide Regulation. So that is not something that's within our realm. If Department of Pesticide Regulation were to register the hydrogels for ant control, and we've got the recommendation from the UC, we would definitely be able to make those recommendations as a tool for use in the program. We,
Materials are both registered in citrus.
correct.
It's just the use that we're talking about. And we already have baited the granular with the seduce material. It's just another usage.
Right, and
It's ridiculous. We have to wait this long.
it's a DPR issue. I worked at DPR for 7 years before coming to CDFA. It's a different delivery method that would have to be analyzed and approved. I think probably the concern, if I'm guessing and I don't know, would be environmental fate of the pesticides that are suspended in the hydrogel. Would it be attractive to animals? Would it be attractive to children? Could it be I understand it's a different delivery method. And I think that's where it's probably being held up. I'll put a note in my phone to follow with friends at DPR and just ask if what's the holdup with the hydrogel, or if it's even been submitted to DPR. I don't know. But that becomes a DPR issue because it's a pesticide delivery method.
All right, if you want to be in the question queue, put your hand up. I've got one here and I think I saw one back there. No? Okay. So this is going to be our last question and then we're going to move on to our next speakers.
I guess one of my questions is, can you have an ACP level that could be where you'd come up with a different method as opposed to saying spraying? You have to have when you test their fields, you just don't see ACP. In other words, you come up with a test method that defines, okay, if I have this method and I test, there's no ACP there. So then if it's his method or you use Hoover flies or whatever it is, you come up with a standard that says you can't have more than this. Otherwise you have to spray.
I think the issue there is, how do you make that determination when any ACP could potentially be carrying CLAS? So if I say, okay, if you have 5 psyllids, you're good to go. What if all 5 of those psyllids are carrying CLAS?
But maybe your criteria is whatever test you do, you don't find any psyllids, or you test
What-
every psyllid you find and there's none of them that have.
But are you finding all the psyllids? So I'll give you an example. When we established ACP quarantines in the valley, we talked to USDA and said, hey, we haven't had a detection. Well, let's just say Monterey. We haven't had a detection in Monterey in 4 years. We have traps out, we're doing survey. And they said, there's really no way to determine what is the number of traps that have to be out or the amount of survey you have to do to prove that an area is free from.
But don't you, I mean, if you do spraying, that brings the psyllid down. It doesn't mean it's not there either. So you're really trying to come up with the purpose is to knock the psyllids down. So if his method knocks the psyllids down, that's the goal. The goal is to get the psyllids knocked down to a level.
And then we'd have to analyze whatever method somebody comes up with. Our scientists have to analyze that to determine, is it achievable, right? Can you use this method and prevent the movement of psyllids in the load?
But I think it comes down to the detection, the issues with detecting the psyllids. And that's where I think we get hung up too with USDA is we've put together a couple packages now trying to show here we're doing X, Y, Z, A, B, C to show you that there are no psyllids even in this county. Like San Benito, April 6, 2016 was the last detection. And USDA will not recognize that everything that we're doing between visual survey, trapping, everything, that they won't go along with us saying that there's not one psyllid in the county. we're trying, we're trying.
I think, the important thing is when we talk about a performance standard is if you have ideas of how you could mitigate the risk of spreading sillage, share those with us and we will definitely, that's how we came up with the grate cleaning method. That was new until, we weren't doing that. What was it, 2019? And now multiple entities are using it, but it requires a lot of work on the county side. Because on origin and receiving, they have to check the loads to see, are we seeing leaves? Are we seeing leaves? Are we seeing psyllids? So it's a lot of work on the county side when we're implementing these new novel techniques, but we're willing to look at it and we're willing to, try to meet you halfway. That being said, we also have to be able to show it's efficacious for what we're trying to do, which is prevent psyllids from moving in the load.
I also want to recognize that Keith made a great joke that no one laughed at earlier about great EAT and ATE,
I
and
really
nobody
wish-
laughed.
Please let that go.
So I want to, I want to just thank Keith and Victoria for being here. It's really appreciated to be in the room, to hear directly from our regulators as the regulated entities. And so I want to thank you guys for traveling here and making that a priority and being flexible.